about a court that never runs for elections, never gives political speeches, and never asks for votes, yet has the power to decide the future of an entire nation. A court whose decisions can change how people live, what rights they have, and even what the government itself is allowed to do. This is not a story about politicians or elections. This is the story of the United States Supreme Court, the most powerful court in America and one of the most influential institutions in the world. The United States Supreme Court is the highest judicial authority in the country. There is no court above it. Once it delivers a judgment, that decision becomes final and binding on the entire nation. Presidents can disagree with it, Congress can criticize it, and people can protest against it, but the ruling of the Supreme Court stands. This is why many experts believe that the Supreme Court is one of the most powerful forces in American democracy. The Supreme Court was created in 1789, soon after the United States gained independence from Britain. America was a young and fragile nation at the time. The leaders who helped create the country, known as the Founding Fathers, were deeply worried about one thing: the misuse of power. They had just fought a revolution against a king who held too much authority, and they did not want to replace one form of tyranny with another. To prevent this, they designed a system based on balance and control. Power was divided into three branches. The legislative branch would make laws, the executive branch would enforce those laws, and the judicial branch would interpret those laws. The Supreme Court became the highest authority within the judicial branch and was meant to act as a guardian of the Constitution. In its early years, the Supreme Court was not very influential. Its first Chief Justice was John Jay, but the court lacked clear authority. Many Americans barely noticed its existence. The court had no army, no police force, and no direct way to enforce its decisions. Compared to Congress and the President, it appeared weak and insignificant. That changed forever in the year 1803 with a case called Marbury versus Madison. At that time, John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. In this historic case, the court declared that it had the power to review laws passed by Congress and determine whether they violated the Constitution. This power became known as judicial review. Judicial review changed everything. With one decision, the Supreme Court gave itself the authority to strike down laws and government actions that it believed were unconstitutional. From that moment on, the court was no longer a weak institution. It became the final interpreter of the Constitution and one of the most powerful courts in human history. Today, the Supreme Court is made up of 9 justices. One is the Chief Justice, and the other 8 are associate justices. These justices are nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Once appointed, they serve for life. There are no term limits. A justice can remain on the court for 30 or even 40 years, meaning a single presidential decision can shape the nation for generations. The power of the Supreme Court lies in the reach of its decisions. Its rulings apply to the entire country. Congress cannot simply override them, and the president cannot ignore them. Over time, the court has delivered decisions that transformed American society in fundamental ways. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. This decision challenged deeply rooted systems of discrimination and became a major victory for the civil rights movement. In 1973, the court recognized abortion as a constitutional right, reshaping the debate around women's rights and bodily autonomy. In 2015, the court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, changing the lives of millions of LGBTQ+ Americans. These decisions were not just about law, they influenced culture, politics, religion, and personal freedom, the Supreme Court became the place where America's biggest moral and social debates were finally decided. Over the years, nearly every major issue has reached the Supreme Court. Questions about free speech, gun ownership, religious freedom, privacy, voting rights, and government power have all been shaped by its rulings. In many ways, the Supreme Court defines what the Constitution means in modern life. In 2017, Donald Trump became the President of the United States. His presidency was one of the most controversial in American history. He challenged political norms, attacked institutions, and divided public opinion. However, his most lasting influence did not come from speeches or policies. It came from the Supreme Court. During his 4 years in office, Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. This was an extremely rare opportunity. The justices he appointed were Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Barrett Coney. With these appointments, Trump dramatically changed the ideological balance of the court. Before Trump's presidency, the Supreme Court was more evenly balanced between conservative and liberal viewpoints. After his appointments, the court shifted strongly in a conservative direction. There were now 6 conservative justices and 3 liberal justices. This shift had immediate and long-term consequences for American law. The most dramatic outcome of this change came in 2022, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. This decision removed federal constitutional protection for abortion rights and allowed individual states to decide their own abortion laws. Although Donald Trump was no longer president at the time, the justices he appointed played a decisive role in this historic ruling. The reaction across the United States was intense and emotional. Supporters of the decision argued that it restored states' rights, respected religious beliefs, and corrected what they saw as a constitutional mistake. Critics argued that women lost a fundamental right, the court had become overly political, and decades of legal precedent had been destroyed. Protests erupted in cities across the country. The decision deepened political and cultural divisions and raised serious questions about the role of the Supreme Court in a modern democracy. For Trump's supporters, his influence on the Supreme Court was one of his greatest achievements. They believed he delivered on his promises and ensured conservative influence over American law for decades. For his critics, the same influence represented a threat to judicial neutrality and democratic stability. In theory, Supreme Court justices are expected to be impartial and independent. They are supposed to interpret the law without political bias. In reality, judges are human beings with beliefs, values, and worldviews. Presidents tend to appoint judges who reflect their own ideology, which means the court often mirrors the political climate of the country. The influence of the U.S. Supreme Court extends far beyond American borders. Courts around the world study its rulings and often cite its decisions in important cases. Its interpretations of constitutional rights have influenced legal systems in many countries, including India. Looking ahead, the Supreme Court will play a key role in shaping the future. It will decide cases related to artificial intelligence, digital privacy, online speech, immigration, technology, voting rights, and LGBTQ+ protections. As society evolves, the court's interpretations of the Constitution will continue to affect everyday life. The United States Supreme Court is not just a court of law, it is a guardian of the Constitution, a powerful political institution, and a force that shapes society. From its creation in 1789 to the present day, it has defined American rights, limits on power, and the meaning of freedom. Donald Trump's impact on the Supreme Court will continue to influence the nation for generations. The court does not seek attention, and it does not speak often, but when it does, the future of America listens.